Welcome to the X Podcast. We're so excited to have you for another episode, and we're back for a little Russia-Ukraine 2.0. Round two. Another. I thought we'd get together for another episode.
And in the spirit of it, you are wearing Zelensky's
favorite color?
Zoom t-shirt.
Favorite color. Yeah.
Yes.
This is a Zelensky t-shirt.
It is.
And you are wearing
another sports shirt.
Cleveland
Browns.
I don't even know how you can wear that.
Why?
Well, I don't know. I mean, it's a whole nother conversation, but I don't.
Maybe that's another podcast.
Maybe the quarterback you guys just picked up and 22 civil lawsuits that he still has to work through.
A lot more civil lawsuits than starting quarterbacks for the Browns.
That's in
the last however many years.
Thankfully, he's a professing Christian, and
from Clemson University.
Yeah,
Clemson,
not Clemson.
Yeah, Clemson.
Yeah, that's a lot of reaction that I've seen from Cleveland Browns fans in the sports media is very mixed. In other words, I am really struggling with I'll still celebrate my team, but I'm having a really hard time getting behind this move.
Yeah, I'm trying to wrap my mind around how I feel.
How do you feel about it?
How do you feel
about the Browns quarterback?
Which is who?
Ted Nugent?
No, it's not Ted Nugent.
It's Deshaun Watson.
This is somebody who actually plays a sport.
Oh, okay.
It's Deshaun Watson.
Deshaun Watson.
Oh, he is from Clemson.
He is from Clemson.
Okay.
He is.
Yeah, I think it's your dad's favorite
absolutely.
quarterback of all time.
I actually do know that.
I would love to know what your dad seems to think about all this.
Yeah.
I feel like my dad mentioned this because this happened last week.
Yeah,
Yes.
just happened last week.
My dad mentioned this in
What did he
South
say?
Africa. I'm trying to remember what he said.
So Deshaun Watson just got traded to the Browns, who have backed up Brink trucks.
Yep.
He is going to guaranteed make
biggest
200
guaranteed
contract. So he's got the biggest guaranteed contract ever of somebody who has not played in the NFL for almost 2 years. Did he play a year ago?
1 year.
One full year he did not play.
Yep.
Because of all of the allegations and the civil lawsuits of sexual harassment and other things that he was.
He was facing criminal charges.
Facing criminal charges, and then
went before a grand jury,
and they did not
cleared.
Well, that just means that they're not
cleared.
pursuing
They're not
anything more.
pursuing
That doesn't mean that
charges. It doesn't mean nothing happened.
It just means that they're not moving to trial. There wasn't enough. I would say there wasn't enough evidence to move to trial for a federal crime.
I shouldn't say move to trial, to accuse him of charges.
Yes.
Or to give him charges.
Yeah, convict him.
Yes.
Or not
convict him.
Whatever.
To actually,
we're getting our
terms mixed up.
Go to jury.
There was not enough evidence for him to be charged with a crime.
Yeah. And so it's interesting though, but after that, though there's still 22 civil lawsuits and a lot of statements, he gets traded to the Browns, who backed up a Brink truck, and he is getting like $230 million
Fully guaranteed
over the next 5 years.
A lot of that is base salary.
Okay, we don't care about that. It's so anyways, there's a lot of Browns fans that just feel really slimy about it because he was a good quarterback, but now you got somebody who very well may have just done really awful things. Yeah. We don't know. Again, it's the whole innocent until proven guilty, but these are civil lawsuits.
And then after you think through all of it, it's kind of like, who cares about the Browns, right?
Yeah, and that's the bigger issue. That's exactly it.
In the world of sports, actually, the more important thing probably to discuss back
March Madness
in the Southeast would be, March Madness, but also Freddie Freeman.
Who'd you pick to
Freddie Freeman?
No one cares about the Braves.
Oh, my. Okay. 100%.
No.
He leaves. A lot of Braves fans are upset, but apparently who they're replacing him with has just as good of a record.
Buddy watches baseball.
Who are they replacing him with?
I have no idea. I'm not that much into sports, but I do know that the Braves are way more exciting than the Cleveland Browns.
Not around here, they're not. But anyways, I mean, here's the bigger thing.
Cleveland?
Here's the bigger thing you need to know.
The Rock and Roll Hall of Fame
cares about baseball.
That's where the Avengers.
Not true. It's America's favorite pastime.
That is very nostalgic.
So old. It is not America's favorite pastime.
The ratings, the money.
Well,
all those things.
Money. Let's not say money because they actually make more money than any of the other sports.
No,
thank you.
Yeah, they do.
Yep.
Their contracts.
You just don't know sports. It's
No,
true.
no, no.
Their contracts are so huge.
You're talking about contracts for the players.
That's what I'm talking about. For the players.
I'm talking
Nobody
about,
makes more money than the NFL. NFL makes way more money as a business.
So, exactly.
I meant the players.
That's my point. No, I was talking about the
way more
as a
money.
business.
Yeah. Anyways, so
As
What
they,
is this?
as they
bullshit.
should make more money.
Oh my gosh.
Okay.
Anyways, well, that's not what we're here to talk about. So we just want to pick up a little bit of our conversation on Russia and Ukraine. There was a few things that we didn't dialogue, and this will maybe take this in a new direction. And there's obviously it feels like daily there's news unfolding of what's going on, and so it's hard to keep up with what is going on in the conflict and all the different pieces that are moving. But I just thought maybe we could talk a little bit, just step back a little bit bigger picture. What's the implications of this on the globe moving forward? I think that's an interesting question. I heard one person say, I think it was Mark Sayers who said this: if the greatest threat to humanity, and this is a big if, and I know that there are some people politically that are going to be like, no, it doesn't exist, whatever. If, this was just his comment, if the greatest threat to humanity was climate change, in other words, would our planet ever get to a point where the climate is it's irreparable damage, that it would not go, that it can ever get to the point where it can't sustain life as we know it? If that was the greatest threat, it is now not. It's nuclear war. So the question, I guess, would be, where do we see this? I mean, you guys have any thoughts? This is a question. And I'm sure probably you, if you're listening or watching this own, you probably maybe have had thoughts. Maybe you haven't had thoughts about this. Where do we go from here? Will we engage in World War III? What's your prediction? Are we going to be engaged in actual land assault and air assault in foreign soil? Do you guys think that? And what do you think happens post Russia, Ukraine / possibly World War III? We're not futurists. I don't know how to predict that, but I think it's sometimes just kind of like one of those things where you just kind of role play a little bit. You kind of just think, okay, what could happen?
Well, I will say before he goes that, or you go ahead.
No, go ahead. You first.
No.
Okay, I'll go first.
No.
So you can comment about all of my predictions.
Okay.
Yeah.
Let's do it.
Let's go,
Okay.
Nostradamus.
All right, let's go. So I think, first of all, it's conjecture, but let me just say
We
this.
know it's all conjecture.
Okay,
None
good.
of this matters.
I just-
So
okay,
we're
good.
a podcast. None of it matters. It's
preface
all
that.
a bunch of, yeah.
All a bunch of guesses. But I think
These are
I was gonna
Cleveland
say hot
Browns
air.
conjectures.
I think this. I think on some level, there's no way that with the rise of globalization and economies being tied in the way that they are, and I think there could be increased chance for higher weapons to be used. There's no way that I think the U.S. doesn't get involved at some point. Whether
Do you
that's-
think we're going to
whether that's
military?
directly
Military.
Yes,
Military.
Yes,
So you think we're
military.
going to be at war in 3 days?
I don't know if it's 3 days, but at some point
We might be at war by the time this podcast airs.
it's possible.
I don't know.
It's possible, but
So you think we're going to war?
if not directly, at least through NATO.
What does that mean?
So
Supplying? We already are.
not supplying. I mean, there's NATO contingency troops that are under control of like NATO generals that we have.
Yeah, that would not be a
armed
good idea.
Forces that are serving and doing that. Maybe that way. I don't know.
Not according to President Biden, who says we have a new world order coming and the United States is in charge.
Yeah.
Move over, NATO. We're taking this over.
Yeah.
Not kind of what he said?
that-
I don't know. I
That's
might
what
be
he said.
reading into it, but
That's what he said.
we got
before
this
his
news right
NATO
before we
summit.
started this
Yeah,
one,
pretty-
which is a week before this comes out.
pretty
Yeah.
brash.
It is pretty brash.
So who knows? At some point,
yeah.
we might have a new world order, which could mean President Biden is going to be wrestling.
So I think with
In the ring with
NWO,
Elon.
NWO.
Yeah, NWO.
So anyways,
We'll back.
but-
so I think yes that we will be involved eventually. I think
it's the devil horns.
The greater
NWO
the
Wolfpack.
greater existential question though is like what.
Sorry, we're wrestling terms over here, and you're
NWO.
talking existentialism.
I know, right?
Sorry, go ahead.
I know, right? This is how the conversations normally go. But I think, for me, it's the rise of, or it's like the age-old question: democracy versus
What?
authoritarian power or authoritarian governments. Which style?
You think
of
somebody's going to
government-
win out?
someone has
It
to.
feels
No,
like
they don't.
It feels like this.
We've been in
Kinda
odds and had
epic.
this kind of.
Oh, I
for
thought you meant if
years.
there's a war.
If there's a war, somebody's going to win, or we're all dead
Yeah.
from nuclear war. But
It just
What do
just
you
seems
think?
like that's the question that we're trying to solve right now.
you think we're going to war? And who
Well,
knows,
the
we
way
might be,
you
but-
first phrased it was if World War III happens, are we involved? To which I think what you were saying.
Yes.
If World War
If-
III happens, as inextricably linked as we are to everything. We're 100%
Okay, wait.
involved.
Yes.
Let's define World War III then. Because
NATO
we
versus-
already have
powers in the world are
Okay.
at war.
Fight.
Okay, so that would include us, right?
Yes.
It could include us. We're not the
so
only
you're-
global power.
I understand, but you already have 3 nations involved:
Russia,
Belarus,
Ukraine. Yeah.
and Ukraine. So World War though needs to have more global powers. Would you agree?
I would say.
And are you saying that
I would say a
European
world
or
war would be when major powers are involved and it's intercontinental.
And we're
Yes.
talking
And
military, like
intercontinental?
military.
So not
troops
just
on
in
the
Europe.
ground
No.
doing.
Yeah.
Okay, so anyways, you think we'll be involved?
Do I think we're?
I know, I'm
do I
asking,
think
do you think
in
we're
this scenario we're heading to World War III?
Yeah.
Yes or no?
Will diplomacy win out?
No. Diplomacy will not win out.
Okay, I am saying every form of diplomacy, which means invoking sanctions and everything else. So you don't think it's going to win out? You think a couple things are either going to happen, right? Either Russia gets complete control of Ukraine, puts their own government in it, everybody just kind of goes, turns a blind eye. And everybody goes, okay, that's Russia now, right? Or Ukraine is in a long-standing conflict with Russia, constantly getting support, supplies, weapons from NATO, U.S., other foreign countries,
Yep.
and nothing else happens. Or other nations jump into this battle in this conflict, and all of a sudden we have a massive world war.
Yeah.
I think those are probably
Those are the three
right. Maybe the
options. Those are
only
the
three. I
options.
don't know they're
Yes.
only
Yeah.
3, but I'm just kind of painting as real broad strokes. It seems
Yes.
like there's
Yeah.
3 basic things that could happen.
Yes.
Unfortunately, it almost seems like best case scenario of those 3 is that the conflict ends in Ukraine and we have another Cold War on our hands. I mean, when you think
Conflict ends in Ukraine, and they become
Like Ukraine
Russian.
wins.
yeah,
or Ukraine.
right, yeah, like Russia
Wins.
wins
Takes
And
over
then-
Ukraine.
and takes over Ukraine, and then people keep sanctioning, and there's another more severe form of the Cold War.
That's
obviously
that's not best case scenario
that's-
for the Ukrainians.
No,
That
I'm
is-
saying best case. That's a horrible case scenario.
Yeah.
That's almost best case scenario for the world if the other 2 end in World War III.
Yeah.
I think. I actually, of course, I'm not obviously a military expert. I keep hearing people say this is going to be a long-standing war with Ukraine.
I know.
I don't think it will be. I
Why
don't.
not?
I don't think.
You don't think it'll be a lot of resistance? Like, so here's an
If
example.
they take them over, there will be.
Here's an example of a long-standing war that Russia was in this exact same scenario. What they're trying to do, right? So Russia, when they invaded Afghanistan, 1979. So when they go in Soviet Afghanistan war, they basically went in with the same purpose, which is we want to go, and this has kind of been their playbook, and I feel like they're trying to use the same playbook on Ukraine. We're going to go in, we're going to oust the current government, then we're going to put in our own pro-Russia, whether it's communist or whatever, leaders, puppet government to do it. So that's what Russia did in Afghanistan. 10-year conflict, got their butts whooped over 10 years, left with their tail between their legs.
Yeah.
You'd think Russia would learn from that.
Yeah.
Okay. But because what happens is even if you get control of government in there, you have millions and millions of people that are going to fight in resistance.
Right.
That's where I think it could end up being a really long conflict. The conflict will be internal fighting and resistance against
constant
the government that's
insurgencies,
under
all
there.
that.
Yes.
There's going to be,
Yeah.
you know what I mean? And
Yeah,
that
and
I think is when people are saying long-term conflict. I think
Yes.
that's the picture.
For me, when
Yes.
I look at this scenario, I don't look at the Afghanistan example. I look at like Moldova. I look at a couple examples where they
Yeah.
went into countries and they literally just turned it into rubble when they couldn't get their way.
Yeah.
In which, if you look at Mariupol, the southern seaport city, it looks like, that's what they're starting to do with their back against the wall is literally just indiscriminately turn cities unrecognizable.
Yeah.
And so to me, you already have, of course, I don't know all the context of the Afghanistan situation, but here you have, a good chunk of the population is already left. And then, so to me, it looks like you have a military that is either going to win or fight to the death and be destroyed. That's to me why it's hard to
I don't
imagine
think
a
they fight
long
to the
case.
death and be destroyed. I think that you get to a point in these kind of conflicts where people surrender.
Yeah.
When you know that you aren't going to be able to win this conflict, I don't think they'll fight until every last one of them
I don't
has
see that
died.
in the Ukrainian situation. I don't see them surrendering.
I think I'm not saying that they're going to surrender. I'm just saying you can get to the point where you lose such control that you don't have the communication ability to coordinate things, that it ends up being one where you just lose control of it. And so I think that's a possibility.
Yeah.
I hope not, but I do. I mean, I think it's going to be really. Now, what's amazing is we were just talking about right now is that Ukraine is actually now on the counteroffensive.
Yeah.
And they're actually going and taking back towns or an attempt to, which I think is just foiling.
Awesome.
I mean, Russia's probably going, what? That was not in the playbook.
Yeah.
We didn't expect that to happen.
No. So what do you think?
I think we're trying everything we can to stay out of a war. But I think it's probably one of those ones that I think it might be inevitable that we end up in a conflict. And if we end up in a conflict, the world just seems, and I know it's probably not, and probably every generation thinks this, the world just seems different today than it probably was in World War II. And I know it is, but the way we are interconnected and the technology war and I don't know if a world war will look like the previous
No,
world
I think
wars.
that's
I don't
one of the
know
most
if they're going to
fascinating
be
parts of this.
massive land assaults and all of these
Sea
things.
and air.
How much of it is going to be a technological war? I mean,
Cyber attacks.
We've seen Russia really working that for a while.
Well, apparently we've just threatened cyber attacks against Russia.
Well, I'm sure we have the capability of doing all that too. I mean, I think any of these really developed nations with, I think have an ability to do it. I think China has an ability to do that too.
Yeah.
Okay. I think that we have a lot of them. So I think
warfare
that's where
across different
it's going to
fronts.
get fascinating because what's unique about this is you may not be in conflict on your soil, but you may really feel the effects of the conflict.
The
See, I think
disruption.
that's different than 60 years ago, 70 years ago, 80 years ago.
Yeah, it's
How long
almost.
has it been since World War II? My gosh.
I think there's all these different fronts that are going to happen.
75, 80 years ago.
Like you have cyber warfare. I think we're already seeing one front of the war open up with economic warfare. We're seeing economic warfare on a scale we've never seen before, with the sanctions and different things like that. Yes, and then more than troops just kind of heaving at each other across a battlefield, a battle technology. Which long-range missile system can do this, and can we intercept that missile system there? Or, I mean, you
Satellite.
can even
Think about the use of
space.
satellites in space, and there are
Can you
weapons
take
that have
out
been put
a
up in
satellite
space. There have been weapons that have been, you know what I mean?
We did make a space force.
Oh my
That's
gosh.
That's true.
Okay, that doesn't count.
Okay, I'm just saying.
Well,
But I do.
some would say it's very
I
important.
think that if that happened, I do think Elon Musk would turn the plans of SpaceX into trying to figure out how to use that as a weapon.
Probably.
I'm not lying. I actually think he would.
Yeah.
Based on his tweets, I
Yeah.
could see him doing that if we get into actual war. We're sending troops, or we're, and you do think about the technology that you have now to do strikes with drones and all this long range stuff. And it's kind of scary to think about for sure. I mean,
It
kind of just makes me feel like we're approaching this new territory where we have had this idea, and I think generation under me, behind me, younger than me, however you want to say, has probably grown up. If you've grown up, my kids have grown up. There's been a lot of stuff to be anxious about, but there has not really been like this level of. I just think
Sustained peace or progress.
Yeah.
Progress towards getting better.
I guess what I'm trying to say is I feel like if you back up 4 or 5 years ago, I think there's a notion that
We're
we're moving toward utopia.
Yeah.
I think there
that's
has
really good.
been, and that comes with some progressive thought. It's like we're moving toward a utopia one way or another, and that we can solve all of the world's problems with our intellect, with our mind. I mean, I think that through all of that, we are at a massive reminder, a shock that this world is still evil.
Right.
There is a lot of evil in this world. There's people that are doing evil things in this world. And I just think this idea of a perfect peacekeeping globe
Well, it's like
not
that.
exist.
It's like that Mark Sayers thing
It's
is
not going to.
disruption's normal, and these last 3 years have reminded us that
This
we've
is
not
normal.
conquered nature, we've not conquered human nature. And it's interesting, I was thinking about this too. We've talked a lot in length over the last 2 years about the effects of 2020, of depression, suicide, isolation. Not to mention all the effects of the virus, and then out of that same period of time, bubbles over the biggest civil rights movement since the 60s and all the polarization politically and the divisiveness and things. I mean, and then, everything of the last 3 years and we've talked about it, the last three beginning of the years, something crazy's happened.
Yeah.
But if the reports are true that as dictatorial as Putin's always been, that 2020 through 2021 changed him.
Yeah.
The isolation wouldn't it be just a tragic irony that of all the things that we've processed that have come out of isolation, the biggest is this delayed result that the most powerfully evil man in the world was adversely affected by isolation and came out of it ready to start a world war.
I think there's a lot more to that. And so I would
Sure.
love to dive
Yeah.
into it a little bit. I was telling you guys some of the stuff that I had kind of just in just reading up and listening to podcasts. I listened to probably 3, 4, 5 different podcasts of just people, professors talking about like Russian, the ideology of the Russian leaders throughout the years. And I mentioned something in the last one, I think sometimes if you're from a faith context, I've been constantly trying to challenge myself to make sure I stop and pray and not just read the news. You mentioned that quite a bit on the last one. And I said, I think that's a big question. It feels like, what's the point in doing that?
Right.
It's like, what's prayer going to do? I mean, it just seems like it's gotten escalated to a point where it is going to take physical dominance. It's going to take war, weapons, all this kind of stuff. But I want to give credit to, I first heard through Mark Sayers, who is a fascinating futurist in the Christian world, pastors a church, I think it's Red Church in Australia. And he made reference to some podcasts that he's been following Russia for years. And so I went and started listening to a bunch of podcasts. One of them called In Moscow's Shadows by Paul Galiado. He's a British watcher of Russia, kind of consumes all the stuff that comes out of Russia. And he had an interesting episode back in 2020 where he asked this question, who's the most dangerous man in Russia? And his argument, and after reading papers and other things, his argument was that it wasn't Putin and that it was the national security advisor Nikolai Petrushev. And what got really fascinating as I was listening to him talk about this group of people in the Security Council that really control a lot of stuff. So there's a Security Council that I think he said no more than 30 people in Russia. Kind of a nobility, kind of like these are the kind of people that I think he thinks, let me just say that, this wasn't mine, this is somebody who just studies this stuff all the time, but who thinks is actually making all the decisions. Putin chairs it, the seat of the president chairs the National Security Council. Normally, the National Security Advisor was changing quite often. It probably wasn't uncommon for like every year you'd have a new National Security Advisor. But Petrushev became the National Security Advisor in 2008. And he has been in that seat since. And so you're talking about a really long time, okay, where you have, these are where you probably get the oligarchy. These are probably the nobility who probably have a lot of the wealth. They seem to have a lot of the power that sit on this council that probably influence Putin quite a bit. He sits in chair, but I think, and the National Security Council. What's fascinating is listening to Mark Galiado talk about that Petrushev would talk about his successor, and his successor who was an advisor during Yeltsin, and so this would have been in the 90s. You had Gorbachev, and then you had the next president. And so when communism fell, and it was a fascinating time to be in Europe. I actually moved to Europe right as the wall fell. It's kind of interesting going to school on a military base. We actually had it was a holiday, and we had the day off on the anniversary of the wall, the official of the wall falling there in Germany. And so it was an interesting time going over there. And he just talked about how his former successor, okay, in 2006 was talking about, he claimed the 2006 security advisor, so that would have been Petrushev's successor, claimed that his boss from the 90s, so he's like probably a general or security advisor, his boss. So again, this is kind of like the same seat or the higher up in this actually claimed that he had psychic powers. And not only did he claim he had psychic powers, but said that he had an ability to, in a psychic ability to read and know the then Secretary of State, Madeleine Albright. So she was Secretary of State during President Clinton's terms. And that he could basically get into her mind, knew her dreams, psychic powers, just in the 90s when this all fell, and said that the West, and specifically America, has plans and dreams of coming in and taking over Russia.
Wow.
So the reason why I wanted to mention that, because I found this super fascinating. I'm listening to this guy talk about it, and this was back in 2020. This is before this conflict really took off, that he was talking about Petruchev and the Security Council. Now, the Security Council...
When he would talk about his successor, the one that had the psychic powers, would he often reference that specifically, the psychic powers that he possessed?
Which one are you talking about?
Petruchev.
Petruchev. So, and Petruchev, no, he said that his
Successor.
the successor, or the person, not successor, the person before him,
right? His predecessor.
Yes, would talk about his boss. Talked about his boss.
Gotcha. Okay.
Who said this? So it was his predecessor. So all this to say is, what is in the mind of the people who are making these decisions today? So you fast forward, and the Security Council will stay together. They keep this tight grip, and they're responsible for the security of the state of Russia. One of the things that was interesting that is part of a considered national security, and probably the same thing for America, at least with them, before all this happened, was a pandemic. So a pandemic is considered a national threat. It was for them, which means that the Security Council would be responsible for managing and responding to any kind of national threat, being a pandemic.
Yeah.
So their reaction to this and how they handle it, like going back to what you said, because we had these conversations, that they actually moved to isolating Putin quite a bit. And he was isolated probably for his protection, the virus, everybody was a little bit different how they responded to it. And so I think he was isolated severely during this. You had mentioned that someone in South Africa had even said some of the similar stuff. Someone in South Africa was their perspective that something had changed. Now, what's fascinating is you have the British ambassador. This was more recent. You have French foreign affairs people that were in contact with Putin before they invaded Ukraine, that were trying to talk him off the ledge. Remember when
You said someone from America too, who?
Someone else that responded was Marco Rubio, who's kind of sits on a council, I think, a national security council, who I guess at this time was also around the time of the war was tweeting all kinds of things that about Putin as well in this, about being such a security risk and the mindset of Putin. And all of them had responded and basically said, he's not the same person we were talking to in 2019. Almost like something had switched and flipped in him. Again, I don't know about isolation, but the people that he's surrounded around and very insulated. And you got to understand, too, I think in authoritarian type of environments, I think there's a big, you surround yourself with people who are going to tell you what you want to hear or what you think they think you want to hear. And so you're not really, I don't know, you're always getting the greatest counsel when you do that. And you're insulated from, how people really feel and what's going on. But all that to say, I don't think that we, and again, I have no influence on a global setting, but I don't know that we should necessarily just overlook the potential spiritual, demonic forces that could be behind. Because again, you have people that are making these decisions, and again, if you're not in a faith context, you might be going, "This is just all crazy stuff." Okay, it might be, but I'm talking about people who are not faith-based people are talking about the psychic. I mean, there were Russian security advisors, council, that believed this.
Right.
They were, whether you believe it or not. In fact, when the communism fell, Russia had psychics on TV. Talking about this. So there's a sense that there is a supernatural force that they even believed in. We're not talking about people that are maybe Christians or that, but they believed in a supernatural force of the psychic ability and how scary as that,
Yeah.
that could potentially be part of what's leaning toward the mental makeup, the psychic, psych. I don't know. I'm trying to say the psyche of Putin and those leaders who actually think that the West is trying to take them out.
There's something called have you ever heard of psychosomatic?
Yeah.
But it's almost like spiritual thing where you write based on what the spirits give you.
Yeah.
And it's almost like just what I immediately think of when you say that. It's like Russia has been writing psychosomatically their future based on, because I mean, it really is, like you said, if you're not from a faith background, because there's all types of spiritual circles. And there's some denominations that go a little crazy, and they're kind of like the Harry Potter section of Christianity. No offense, Pastor Zach.
I knew that was going to get brought up at least once.
But I do believe, and I don't know how you can be in this world and not believe that there is good and evil and that spiritual warfare is real.
Right.
And the crazy people aside, there is, Jesus talked about that there is such a thing as even there's forces, not just even individually, but regionally. Mm-hmm. I mean, I've known people that have flown over certain places. I mean, this sounds really spiritual, but Seattle, high rates of suicide. I've known people that didn't even know that flew over Seattle that said they were literally overcome with thoughts they never had before. Mm-hmm. I believe there is spiritual darkness that has holds over regions, and you combine that with generational iniquity. Mm-hmm. You combine that with a country that, I mean, people joke about Russia, but there is the word oppressive has always come to my mind when I think of Russia. It's heavy, emotional, spiritually oppressive land.
Yeah.
And then,
well, they were shut and closed for years. And when you speak to the oppressive thing, because I can, my wife's parents were missionaries for almost 6 years.
This church was born in Russia, in a way.
Yes.
In a way, it was.
Way.
Our church was in a unique kind of way. And I've been to Russia. I got to go over and visit them when we were there, and there was absolutely, they would tell you, like, there was an oppressive type of feeling, and I'm not trying to connect this with a political party or ideology, but even communism and the way it was attached. Even honestly, even things with the Russian Orthodox Church, there's some connection between Putin and the Security Council and the Russian Orthodox Church in all of this as well.
Yes.
There's been a growing Russian nationalism in there, before leading up to this, and in certain parts of it. And we've seen that here in America in the last few years. And I just think it is a good term for it. It felt spiritually oppressive. It's an incredible field, and my wife's parents helped plant several churches over in Russia. Some of just phenomenal, doing well. They have planted like 19 other churches.
Yeah.
And so there's been a huge response of people who are desperate for some kind of spiritual freedom.
Yeah.
Even with Russia closed back down.
Yes.
In many ways. Putin was really moving it toward shutting down. Like my wife's parents were wanting to go over, and it was getting harder and harder. This was before the pandemic. It was getting harder and harder to get over there. There's more things, and so and I know that, like, anytime there's that going on, there is going to be a massive movement in the positive in the church.
Yeah.
Because we see that even in Acts. We see that in the beginning when there was oppression happening.
Persecution always precedes revival.
Will cause it. And so I think that Russia's going to be
But to your point, though, I think it's worth noting that one of the dark spiritual fruits of spiritual oppression is paranoia. Like, when you're talking about that, I couldn't help but think of Saul in the Old Testament.
Yeah.
Who the Bible says all the time he was vexed by a spirit. He was even though he believed in God, he was actually grieved. He was constantly oppressed, and the fruit of it was what? A deep, life-ruining paranoia towards David.
Oh yeah.
David's out to get me.
So much so that what did he do? He went and saw a psychic.
Yep.
A medium.
Yeah.
To consult the dead on what's happening. And so I guess to say all of that, we're just trying to say all that to, again, if you're not a Christian, you're not a faith base, you might think, okay, I don't know if this stuff's real. That's fine. I can't prove a lot of this stuff, but we see the effects of it. And I just think one of the things I just think is important is to remind those of you that are faith-based to say that if there is spiritual and demonic things at play here, it's important that we're not just reading the news, but we're also praying.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that there is a spiritual authority that we've been given to engage in that fight. And prayer is a weapon that
And
we
to
have.
intercede on
And
behalf.
to intercede
And pray.
on behalf for the Russians, for the Ukrainians, and what's going on.
Yeah.
And I'm praying that this thing would stop and that
Yeah.
we could bring peace. But, it's just, I think there's a war.
Yeah.
A war within a war
Yeah.
that's potentially going
Yeah.
on here that we
Yeah.
can't see. And I don't think we should overlook it. And then when you hear kind of the history
Yeah.
and you see what people are saying about Putin, it's like the lights are out.
Yeah.
Like things are different. Like something's
Yeah.
snapped. It kind of really does make you wonder.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Makes you wonder kind of what's going on and what the future is going to be.
Yeah. It's definitely fascinating. I think that when you look at this, I think for me, the question is, okay, if there's some sort of spiritual warfare going on here, what then would come next? Because I think there's this whole sect of Christianity or belief that would say this is just a sign of things to come.
Oh, so you want to get into the rapture index?
No,
You were
So
quoting
you were-
Pat
no.
Robertson earlier.
No, it was
Pat
not.
Robertson, I think it is fascinating to say, though. And I think we should
Address
mention
that.
this because
there are people who are looking at what's happening and they're seeing some of these spiritual connections and they're drawing conclusions based on scriptural text.
I
and
don't
different
like
things
what
that.
what
That God is compelling. He said,
yeah, what
he
did he
said-
say?
He said God has compelled Russia to
God has
invade
compelled
Ukraine.
Putin
Putin.
to invade Ukraine
To
to
bring
basically
about-
to bring about the end of the world.
Kickstart
world.
The end of the world. I just,
You don't like that.
no.
These
I don't-
moments are eschatological gold mines
Yes.
for people
For
like
people.
that.
They are,
Yes.
and so now, what I don't like that I've seen out of that. Okay, first of all, I don't know if that's true, and so I don't want to. I know we've got done talking about there are spiritual things that work potentially behind here.
Yeah.
I'm not, but the moment I just have a hard
Start
time of saying
ascribing
God
dates.
compelled Putin to do this.
Yeah.
And I just think that caution that we just go to like.
Can you imagine
said,
a
that we just
Ukrainian
jump-
believer huddling down here and that?
Yeah, I'll say, well, God sent them in here because He's bringing the end of the world. Like, I just think that there is a sect of
Yes.
a version of Christianity
Christianity,
that
faith.
has come out that is like, I want to say, and this is kind of what a little bit, just me personally, kind of really support Putin and what's happening. Maybe not so much because they believe ideologically in what Putin believes, but almost like it's an initiation
the
of
end
this
times.
end times that we want to accelerate toward. I think many of them are already heightened. I've heard that through COVID.
Yeah.
All of these things are signs of the
Yeah.
end times.
Yeah.
And so now this is added to it. Now
Yeah.
I've heard about Gog and Magog, and I've
Yeah.
heard about everything. And this is all stuff from Revelation Scripture.
We're left behind
But-
times.
but-
People of the north coming.
Yeah, raise your hand if you read.
Especially
Anyways,
since it was
anyways,
Petrushev Nikolai.
It was Nikolai.
That is
Nikolai
like
Petrushev.
Carpathia.
Yeah.
Anyways, but I think this
Romanov.
does speak to. I think there's something inside all of us as humans that we look at what's happening here, and we just see the devastation that's being, wreaked across the continent, and we just say we're looking for some sort of redemption. We're looking for some sort of hope that we can have, and so people are trying to grasp at anything to say that maybe this is the beginning of God coming back and making everything right or doing things like that. And what would you say to that? People who are like just looking, trying to grasp.
There's
or
always a grasping
doing
of
things-
making sense of life.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
I just think we have to be careful that I feel like there has been in Christianity forever. We're trying to interpret the signs.
We're trying to
Jesus said
make
you can
the world
interpret
fit
signs, but
the Bible.
we're trying to interpret the signs, read the tea leaves enough so that we can determine when Jesus is coming back. Or
Yes.
and I feel like what Jesus said, He was like, no one knows,
Yeah.
not even the Son, but the Father. And I think one of the things I've turned me off to this heightened anticipation of the
Blood
end of the
rage.
world, the Armageddon, the eschatological, I guess, paranoia. I don't mean to offend. If that, I'm just saying, what's turned me off is that has just become such a focal point of people's lives that it seems like that they're running around going, "It's happening, it's coming, it's
Yeah.
this and this," and it doesn't ever seem to be doesn't even. It just seems a lot of times that the energy is not turned toward. I want to do everything I can to share my hope and faith with people there. It really just turns into more like just this panic. Are you
ready?
Bunkering down.
It's almost
the world's
excited and scared.
Yeah.
Instead of a brokenheartedness that turns into courage.
Yes.
And I don't want to say that across the board. And I know we're generalizing a little bit, but we've seen enough of this. I mean, you sent us. I mean, because you read. You're a subscriber to what was it? The
Rapture Index.
No, what's it called?
I can't believe that's a real thing.
Rapture Ready.
And how did you know that?
No, because he subscribes. The Rapture Ready Index.
Okay, full disclosure, I do not subscribe.
I don't know what this is, and so I want to just say right now, on the front end, because he was reading a little bit to us. If this is something that you love and you read this all the time and you get excited about it, I apologize in advance. I'd never heard about this, and my reaction was I was laughing. Okay, and so I don't mean to offend. You just put that on ignorance. I didn't know about this, but so in the Rapture Ready Index, the RRI.
Yes.
Okay.
If you're not a believer watching, I am so sorry.
I know. If you're not, these are the kind of things that you just go, oh my gosh, this is why I wouldn't want to be one.
Right.
And can I just tell you, I understand 100%, and I kind of feel the same way as you.
Yes.
So I am, in a way, and I'm not trying to poke fun, because there are probably people that really do believe this in sincerity, and that's possible. Mm-hmm. But when we have an index, and we are 1 point away
from the all-time high.
When he said that, we're scored a 188 right now.
Yes.
What'd you say the level said? Buckle your seatbelts?
Well,
above 160, fasten your seatbelts.
But hold on. But my first reaction, I said, wait a minute. So you're telling me it's been higher. Mm-hmm. It's been higher than this. Mm-hmm. We were actually closer to the end times.
Before
we'll always see signs.
Y2K or?
No. When was it? It was 2000. Oh, no, don't even bring that up. That was bad.
Yeah.
Wasn't it October 2016?
October 10th, 2016.
So I'm sure that wasn't politically motivated at all. That's right before a major election, right?
Right.
But then they have a scale.
Yeah.
And we're just hoping to get back down under 100.
Which was slow prophetic activity.
Say it. You need to speak up.
Slow prophetic activity.
So when we are under a scale of 100, we have slow prophetic activity happening in our globe, right?
Yeah.
And then there's other
kind of like pre-Malachi times.
So no. And then there's what's the next? There's
100 to 130 is moderate prophetic activity.
Okay.
And then 130 to 160 is heavy prophetic activity, and then above 160 is fasten your seatbelts.
Literally, that's what they call it. Fasten your seatbelts.
Fasten your seatbelts. So
wow.
It just say this, that the Rapture Index has two functions.
Are you ready?
One is to factor together a number of related end-time components into a cohesive indicator. And the other is to standardize those components.
Oh, sorry.
To eliminate the wide variance that currently exists with prophecy reporting.
Let's put it this way. I will say this. If you're someone who believes in the end times, okay, I will say this. We are one day closer to it than we were yesterday.
Yep.
It's true.
That's true.
We are moving closer toward whatever that is. I am not so sure that we have interpreted Revelation the best. Yeah. That's just my personal. And so I don't. When I hear people going, I think it could happen any day now. I'm just sitting here going, every generation that I have known has said it's going to happen any day now. Mm-hmm. I mean,
especially when there's wars, World War II.
Yes. And Jesus said there'll be wars, rumors of wars, and, and so
all sorts of signs.
Sure. But that's what we don't want to mock. Jesus did say discern the times.
Yes.
Yeah.
But he didn't say to obsess or hyper interpret. He said discern.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And
I think the question you have to ask yourself is, where does all of this discerning take you? And I think you brought it up. Does it take you to this escapism? I just want to, leave this world behind, and I don't care about anything that happens, or does it turn you to look at the people around you who might be suffering, and just say, hey, I want to do whatever I can do in this moment to help spread the news about who Jesus is, or tell people about what's going on. Yeah. And so I think,
or do you hunker down in a compound and wait for it to come?
Wait for it to come.
Because I've also heard that narrative.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we
should move into a compound.
The prepper
we should all and it's like that just to me seems, I don't know, it just seems like antithetical to really what Jesus was about.
Yeah.
And it just seemed like he was like, I'm about reaching people. It's. I mean, there is an essence in Scripture that talks about being ready.
Yes.
I mean, there's parables Jesus gave about the virgins with the
Yes.
oil.
Yes.
There's all these things about being ready. But I like to think more like I live ready. I don't want to think about getting ready.
Right.
It's authentic. It's real. I am not worried.
Yeah.
I'm not stressed. That doesn't mean I don't have concern of of what's going on in the geopolitical realm and how that's going to impact my family and my kids and our country and all that. We can have concern with all that, but when you look at this in the broader sense, I'm just not going to let that dictate my mentality, my peace. It's not going to steal my peace.
Yeah.
And I would hope that it's not going to lead me to make statements that say, "Oh, I'm for Putin," because God must be really moving the chess pieces to finally get us to checkmate.
Yeah.
I don't know if that's always the motivation behind
No.
it, but it's like I have a hard time getting behind what Putin is doing, and especially if you're a faith-based person, especially if you have not heard any of the narrative of some of the spiritual stuff that could absolutely be behind what's going on.
Yeah.
Like I'd kind of be a little cautious before I'm putting that on God. That first of all is not going to be
Right.
a really great representation of God in this world.
Yep.
Right.
And so I would just caution. I'm not saying that you shouldn't, like Jesus said, discern the times. Okay, I'm not saying that we should not pay attention. I'm not saying this, but here's what I would want to know: how is that going to change anything for me?
Yeah. Yeah. I don't know.
If we're getting that much closer, how does it change? I mean, maybe for people. Well, I mean, I'm just saying I'm going to keep doing what I'm doing, leading our church. We're gonna. If you can hear that, it's a deluge outside, and I don't know.
Wow.
Like right now, while we're recording this, it's pouring rain so hard that I can't even hear myself think. But I just don't know. I don't know what would change for me. I live on mission. I live with a sense of urgency. Our church does that. I want to share the hope of Jesus.
Yeah.
I want to do it with anybody and everybody that I can every single day and every single weekend. And I just don't feel like any of that would ever change if I could read the signs and go, man, we're closer. It could be in 5 years, 10 years. What am I going to do differently?
Yeah. So let me ask this question. We kind of opened up, starting talking about like, are we going to be involved in World War III? What is this going to look like? And then this epic conversation of good versus evil, almost like end times or not. Like, there's probably a lot of people who are really afraid right now, who are looking out and just they're afraid of what would happen if there would be a World War III. Is the end times coming? What would you say to the person who's listening, who's just afraid about what the future holds?
Yeah, I think a few things right off the top, and of course this depends on if you're a person of faith or not. But I like when COVID first hit, Stephen Furtick did an IG Live where he did the whole thing of like Peter and the wind and the waves, and he said, "Check the wind, don't watch the wind." What was it John Maxwell said when the children of Israel were going into the promised land? The ones that focused on giants grew their fear. The ones that focused on milk and honey grew their faith. So if you're full of fear right now, that's a great indicator where your focus is.
Yeah,
that's good.
So if you're full of fear, your focus has been on an addictive news cycle of doom, and you need to redirect your eyes from the wind back onto Jesus. I'm just going to be spiritual. If you're a person of faith, because whatever you're putting in focus becomes the biggest thing. So history, wars come and go, kings come and go, moments change, but all of that is an ant against the Swiss Alps when you put current events against the one that breathed the universe into existence. And so part of it is where I'm putting my focus. Another thing is to have an eternal perspective. So if again, this is where we get into the wrong wars. We're not in a political war. We're not ultimately in a flesh and body war. We're in a spiritual war.
Yeah.
And I really do believe throughout history and throughout Scripture that prayer changes things.
Yeah.
And there's power in prayer. I think, so I would change where my focus is. I would change what I would see as the real war. And then I would get on mission. You can't live on mission and full of fear at the same time. And I would say this world is not our home. And there is destiny and true purpose over every single one of us.
Yeah.
And we get to choose whether we sink back in fear or whether we move forward in courage.
Yeah.
And the future is not going to be written by people that live in fear.
Yeah.
The future is going to be written by people that live in courage. And I would say, honestly, this is a time that needs spiritual eyes, and this is a time that needs leadership.
Yeah.
So when I was in South Africa, one of the first, like day 3, we took a boat ride out to Robben Island, where Nelson Mandela was. It is actually a really convicting moment for me because we're going through. South Africa was like really COVID strict, and I mean, masks in certain places still, and 6 feet separation. Hand sanitizer wasn't a courtesy like the States. It was mandatory. And we were stuck in this really hot, stuffy place for about an hour. And I'll just be honest, I was getting a little grumpy because we were finally getting ready to get out of the boat. So finally, I get past the ticket station outside, getting ready to get to the boat. My dad gets stuck. They can't scan his ticket. Something's wrong. And I'm starting to get a little frustrated. And I feel bad for my dad, who's older, trying to get. And so finally, I was like, what is the deal? Why is this so hard? And there was an older man in a wheelchair sitting in front, a South African. And he pulled me over. He goes, hey, come here. I was like, so I went over there, and he goes, everything's going to be okay. He's like, you and your dad are going to be able to be on this tour together. They're just having a problem because the line was so long. And I was like, okay. So long story short, we take an hour boat ride over to Robben Island. We get on the tour. That guy that had pulled me over was Nelson Mandela's roommate.
What?
In prison.
Whoa.
What?
He's and if you've ever heard like someone that has been through that much pain talk, the weight
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
they carry,
Yeah.
the room was
Yeah.
hushed, every word. He took us into the cell where they were.
Wow.
And so we slept there on that floor. He started talking about the moment that he hadn't seen family or friends in 10 years, but they told him his dad was coming. And so finally he goes to meet his dad, and they pull him into the office and tell him that they just shot his dad and to go back to his cell.
Yeah, I remember
He
that.
describes the torture. But then he starts talking about Mandela. And he starts talking about how Nelson Mandela, because he was a lawyer, would petition
Yeah.
them to give them bunk beds. And they would say, okay, fine. He would wear them down. He'd say, fine, we'll give you one, but not the rest. And Nelson Mandela said, if everybody doesn't get bunk beds or a bed or a mattress, then I don't. And he just started talking about the leader that Nelson Mandela was. And he just started talking about the humility, the servanthood, the maturity, the discipline. And of course, they say, one of the reasons they say that the phrase Mandela, I've heard this for years, of a wounded healer. Because Nelson Mandela rises out of 27 years in prison. They take him straight to give this speech. And this speech shaped the rest of the nation.
Yeah.
He could have come and spoken out of bitterness, resentment. Let's rile everybody up. But he spoke from a place of forgiveness. He spoke from a place of speaking of the future. All this to say, we get back on the bus, and our South African tour guide, he said, he goes, there were the days of the Martin Luther King Jr.'s. There were the days of the Winston Churchills. We had the days of the Nelson Mandela. He said, I just grieve the fact that there's no Nelson Mandela of today. And I just think our world is ripe
Yeah.
for true leadership. And we have the Zelenskys. We have great, but the world is ripe for another Mandela. The world is ripe for a Caleb or a Joshua to step forward and to speak courage, wisdom, hope, and future into this historic moment.
Yeah.
Wow. That's crazy. What a story.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's a great reminder. And if anything, what that guy who's Nelson Mandela's former jailmate, pulls you aside. I think one of the things
Man,
that
you talk about feeling low.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I think one of the things that he brought to that moment was a little perspective.
Yeah.
You're gonna be all right.
Yeah.
I sat in a jail cell with him.
Yeah.
You're gonna be all right. You're gonna
Yeah.
get on there. It's gonna work.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And when I think about that, that's somebody who has enough experience that he has some perspective that goes, it's not the end of the world.
Yeah.
It will get it all worked out. It'll be fine. Stop freaking out.
Right.
And that is almost kind of what I think I would hope for all of us in the most tumultuous times. Like this is probably the most uncertain.
Yeah.
If you think about it, it's not just this, but for the last 2 years has been some of the most uncertain times we've faced. And from what COVID and the pandemic and loss of lives through just all the political things, the social things you talked about, and then even now facing a crisis that could end up in a world war, and
Yes.
and who knows? And I think when you see all of those, that's your Rapture Ready Index. You
Yes.
see all those things, because my guess is they're looking at it, and Jesus said there will be famines, and there'll be this, and there'll be, and all these things.
Disease.
And I think how do I just want to have, like you said, an eternal perspective. That this life is short, but this world is not my home. And I'm living, but I want to live on mission, and I want to live for a greater purpose.
Yeah.
And so I can do that without being an alarmist.
Yes.
I can do that without
Yes.
going, oh my gosh, just, and I think I think we don't need that.
Yeah.
I wish, I just think some of those that want to do that, hey, listen, maybe keep that to yourself. Right now, what we do need is leadership. Right now, what we need are some people who are going to come at moments of crisis with faith, and they're going to come with moments of crisis with peace internally, and they're going to go, let's just move forward in this, and let's do the right thing.
Yeah.
And then I feel like that's kind of what, you're right, our world's looking for it right now.
Yes.
Our world is looking for it. And when there's so much struggle for power, and everybody is so hungry for power. Man, that's what was so beautiful about Nelson Mandela. Is you think about it, the people that had little to no power, I mean, later in his life, after all that, he did. But the people that had no power, really, when you think about human history, ended up having the greatest influence.
Yep.
What was it Napoleon Bonaparte said? He said, "At this moment, I command millions who would fight for me, but it's because they fear me." He said, "Yet this man named Jesus had more millions who would lay down their life because they loved him."
Billions.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Think about it.
Yeah.
So the very people, and so we always think in terms of power.
Yeah.
And how do we get in control? And I just think, what an incredible picture, not only from Jesus, but all throughout history, of the most influential people in our world that have made the most impact and brought the most change,
Yeah.
have not been the ones in power.
Yeah.
No.
Yeah.
They've
Because
been the ones
power
through sacrifice.
is
They're the
not what
ones-
changes the world. Influence.
Yeah.
Influence.
And so I hope that maybe, even just as we wrap this up, this podcast, I would hope that maybe a takeaway from this would just be, when you're around others, why don't you carry yourself with a sense of faith, carry your
That's so
sense
good.
with a sense of mission,
Yeah.
be the influence
Yes.
Yeah.
in those conversations. When people, because you're going to run into people who are freaking out about
Yes.
what could happen. If we go into World War,
Yes.
you're going to see a whole new level of heightened
Anxiety,
fear and
stress,
Yeah, and I
tension.
think this is the kind of time where hopefully the people of God who have faith, who they're not alarmists and they're not walking in fear, are going to go, man, I know all this is going on around me, but I've got a peace inside of me. And I think when the world sees that, they're going to say, why do you have that? What is that? I want that.
Yeah.
And I think that's the way we should carry ourselves. And so I would encourage you as well, just to, as a reminder, to, if you're a person of faith, pray
Yeah.
Yes.
for the situation. That's part of what we were talking about, that there may be far more spiritual influence in what is going on in the world than we even realize right now.
Yeah.
And I just think one of the greatest things that we can do, one of the greatest weapons that we have, is prayer, is interceding for those. And I think that's what we're called to do. And intercede for the Ukrainians, intercede. I mean, you're praying for Putin. Intercede and pray for peace in this conflict. Pray for God to change people's hearts.
Yeah.
Pray for God to change the Security Council. Pray for God to, who knows what will happen. So,
Yeah.
Yeah.
but
That's good.
it's been a fascinating
That's really good.
conversation, guys. And just say thank you so much for all of you that have been tuning in, whether it's through YouTube or you follow us in Spotify or Apple Podcasts or whatever platform. Thank you so much for connecting with us. We hope that these conversations give you an ability to process and to think. We don't have the answers. We're pastors. We have we're talking about geopolitical issues, and we have
No experience.
we love kind of to be in what's going on culturally. We love
Yeah.
to research and read and do all of that. And so we just try to bring a little bit of an informed conversation to the table. But really, at the end of the day, I think one of the things we would love for you to do is process with us.
Yeah.
And so as you're processing all these things, if you have thoughts and if you have comments, and we'd love to hear them, you can always email us to podcast@thex.church. There's also ways you can leave comments and, other things. But thank you for subscribing. You get these updates, and thank you for even rating and reviewing. Really does help kind of get the conversation out to more people. So thank you so much for doing that. And until next time, God bless you. Have a great week.